I had just finished 3 months of remodeling my house. My daughter Linda arrived with news that caused me profound pain. She walked right through the front door without even saying hello. She looked around the new living room and said, "Mom, Michael's parents are moving in here next Saturday. It's all decided." I stood there paralyzed, holding a cleaning rag, watching my 35-year-old daughter speak as if she were organizing her own home. I had spent my entire life savings $15,000 to make everything new. The paint, the floors, the furniture. Every corner of that house held my sweat and my dreams of finally having a beautiful home for my family. Michael Harris, my son-in-law, walked in right after her with that forced smile I knew so well. "Ms. Hope, you're going to love having the company. My parents are quiet people. They won't be any trouble at all." Mom. I felt my heart race as I realized they had already made the decision without even asking me if I agreed. Linda kept talking about how it would be temporary, just until they got organized, but her eyes avoided mine. Michael mentioned that his parents had already sold the apartment where they lived and needed a place for a few months. I looked at my new furniture, the walls I had painted with so much love, and an immense sadness filled my chest. The way Linda spoke hurt me more than I could imagine. It wasn't the first time she had made decisions about my life without consulting me, but this was different. This was about my sanctuary, the place where I had invested not just money, but hope. "Mom, you won't be alone all day. You'll have someone to talk to," Linda said, scrolling through her phone as if the matter was already closed. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't checked with me first, why she just assumed I would be okay with it. But the words got stuck in my throat like they always did when she used that tone of authority. Michael walked over to my new kitchen and started measuring the spaces with his eyes. "My parents' table will fit perfectly here, and in the living room we'll have to move some things so they can put their favorite armchair." Every word was like a hammer chipping away at me inside. They weren't asking for permission. They were informing me of changes they had already planned. Linda added that Frank and Hope Harris would only bring the essentials, but I knew my daughter well enough to distrust those vague promises. That night, after they left, I sat on my new sofa and spoke to the Lord in a silent prayer. "Lord, give me strength to understand what is happening." Did I do something wrong by wanting to have my house just the way I always dreamed? I looked around the room, which still smelled like fresh paint, and I felt as if I was losing something precious before I even got to enjoy it. I had worked double shifts at the textile factory for 6 months to save the money for the remodel. Every dollar I spent I had earned with my own 2 hands sewing from 5 in the morning until 11 at night. I remembered how I had chosen every paint color, every piece of furniture with the excitement of a 68-year-old woman who for the first time in her life could afford to have the nice things she always wanted. The wooden dining table I bought on installments, the sky blue curtains I had embroidered myself at night, the cream-colored living room set I had seen in a store window, which had cost me 4 full months' salary. All of it was now going to be rearranged to accommodate people who hadn't even asked for permission to come. Linda had mentioned the Harris family was elderly and needed help, but I was elderly too, and nobody seemed to consider what I needed. At 68 years old, after a lifetime of working for others, caring for others, and sacrificing for others, I thought it was finally my turn to enjoy some peace in my own space. But there I was again, being the last to find out about decisions that directly affected my daily life. The conversation Linda and Michael had in my kitchen replayed in my head like a painful echo. They spoke of my spaces as if they were theirs, of my home as if it were just a resource available to solve other people's problems. At no point had they asked if I was prepared to share my home, if I had the energy to live with 2 more people day in and day out, if my life's routine would be disrupted. They had simply assumed I would be available just as I had always been. I couldn't sleep that night. I got up several times to walk through my house, touching the freshly painted walls, fluffing the pillows on the sofa, breathing in that new smell that had excited me so much just a week before. In every corner, I saw the effort I had made, the overtime hours I had worked, the expenses I had cut from my budget to afford the remodel. I had skipped buying my blood pressure medication. I had eaten beans and rice for months. I had walked for miles to save on bus fare, all for the dream of having a decent home. When dawn broke, Linda arrived early with a list of things we needed to do to prepare the house. It wasn't a consultation. It was a list of instructions. "Mom, we have to move your dresser to make space in your bedroom. Michael's parents will sleep there and you can move into the utility room." The utility room. That small damp space where I kept my cleaning supplies would now be my bedroom. My daughter had just reduced my status in my own house to that of a maid who sleeps in the storage closet. "Linda," I said, my voice trembling, "don't you think we should talk about this calmly? I'm an elderly person too, and I have my habits, my schedules." She cut me off with that condescending smile she had developed in recent years, the same one she used when she wanted to make me feel like I was being difficult. "Oh, Mom, don't be selfish. It's only temporary. Besides, you've always been so sociable. You'll love having company all the time." Sociable. That word echoed in my head as I watched my daughter move my things without asking me where I wanted them put. I had been sociable all my life when it came to helping others, welcoming visitors, being available for anyone who needed me. But I had never asked to be forced to be sociable in my own home, losing my privacy and my personal space without my consent. Michael arrived with a truck full of boxes before noon. "We just brought a few things ahead of time," he explained as he unloaded what looked like the entire contents of a house. Boxes marked kitchen, living room, bedroom, books, and decorations. Linda saw me staring at the sheer amount of stuff and quickly said, It was easier to bring it all in one trip instead of making several. Easier for whom, I wondered silently. Frank Harris, a 70-year-old man with an authoritarian look, got out of the truck and immediately started giving instructions on where he wanted everything placed. He didn't greet me. He didn't thank me for welcoming them into my home. He simply started reorganizing my space as if he owned it. His wife, Hope Harris, what an irony that she shared my name, was a 65-year-old woman who inspected every corner of my house with a critical eye. She commented on what things needed to be changed so they could be comfortable. "This sofa is too close to the window," Hope said, pointing to my favorite sofa, the one I had saved for months to buy. "And these curtains let in too much light. Frank needs complete darkness for his naps." Every comment was a small slap in the face to all the love I had poured into decorating my home. They weren't suggestions. They were orders disguised as observations. And Linda nodded along to everything as if they were completely reasonable requests. For that entire day, I became a spectator to the invasion of my own house. I watched them move my furniture, hang their pictures over mine, and reorganize my kitchen to accommodate their utensils and their dietary habits. Frank installed his own television in the living room and changed all the channel presets. Hope emptied my cupboards to put in her own dishes and spices. Linda coordinated everything as if it were a normal move, completely ignoring the tears I was trying to hide. At sunset, when they had transformed my home into something unrecognizable, Linda approached me with that smile I had learned to fear. "See, doesn't it look so much better like this, Mom? More family-like, more cozy." Familiar for whom, I wanted to ask. Cozy for whom? Because for me, this house no longer felt like my home. It felt like I was a guest in a place that no longer belonged to me. That night, lying in the utility room on a borrowed cot, because mine was now being used by the Harris family, I heard them rearranging things in what used to be my bedroom. I heard their voices talking about what else they needed to change, what other pieces of my furniture were in their way, how they were going to distribute the space to feel at home. The irony of that phrase caused me a pain I had never experienced before. They wanted to feel at home in my home, while I felt like a stranger in the place that had been my refuge for 30 years. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what my living room looked like before that morning, how my kitchen smelled when it only had my spices, how it felt to walk through my house without having to ask permission or apologize for wanting to use my own spaces. But those memories already felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else's life. In just 12 hours, I had gone from being the owner of my home to being a tolerated resident in a space that others had decided to reorganize according to their needs. Michael had mentioned it would be temporary, but none of them had defined what that word meant. Temporary like a week, a month, a year, and who would decide when this temporary period was over? Me, the owner of the house, or them, the people who had shown up with a moving truck and plans for a complete reorganization. The uncertainty filled me with an anxiety I hadn't felt even when I was widowed 15 years ago. The next day, I woke up early, as was my habit my entire life. But when I came out of the utility room, I found Frank already settled in the kitchen, making his breakfast with my dishes and using my food without asking. "Good morning, Hope," he said without looking up from the newspaper he had spread across my brand-new dining table. It wasn't a conversation. It was barely an acknowledgement of my presence in my own kitchen. Hope came down a little later, already dressed, but with messy hair, and immediately started inspecting the pantry. "Frank, they don't have the cereal you like here, and your decaf coffee isn't here either." She spoke as if I were responsible for stocking the pantry according to their preferences, as if my kitchen were a hotel that had to adapt to the needs of its guests. When I tried to explain that this was the coffee I bought and the cereal I liked, Hope looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Hope, now that we're family, we have to think about what's best for everyone." Family. That word which used to fill me with warmth now sounded like a trap. Linda arrived mid-morning and found her in-laws completely installed, behaving as if they were the hosts and I was the visitor. Instead of noticing how strange the situation was, my daughter smiled, satisfied. "It's so good you already feel at home. Mom, isn't it nice to have the house full of life?" Life that had arrived uninvited and had displaced my own. During that second morning, I observed how each of them had established routines that didn't involve consulting me about anything. Frank had taken ownership of the remote control and the TV schedule. Hope had reorganized the kitchen for her convenience and set meal times that didn't line up with mine. Linda came and went, offering suggestions on how to make co-living more harmonious, but all her suggestions involved me changing my habits to adapt to theirs. "Mom, maybe you could eat breakfast a little later so you don't clash with Frank's schedule," Linda suggested while watching her father-in-law read the paper at my dining table. "And in the afternoons when Hope is watching her soaps, you could take the time to do your things in your room." My things in my room, as if my entire house had been reduced to the utility room, as if my life had to be organized around the preferences of people who had just shown up. That afternoon, while I was trying to find a moment to sit in my own living room, I overheard a conversation between Frank and Michael that broke my heart into pieces. "Your mother-in-law is a nice lady," Frank was saying, "but she needs to understand that we're family now and things have to work differently. She can't keep acting like she's the only one who lives here. Like I'm the only one who lives in my house. The house that I had bought, maintained, remodeled, and cared for 3 decades. In that moment, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a violent break. It was more like a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long. I realized that Linda, Michael, and the Harris family had built a version of reality where I was some kind of tenant. A tenant who was lucky enough to live in a house that now needed to be shared with its real occupants. A version where my 68 years of life, my decades of work and sacrifice, and my rights as the property owner had been completely erased. That night, lying in the utility room again, listening to the Harris family discuss what other changes they wanted to make in their new house, I made a decision. It was a decision that was going to surprise everyone, but I kept my expression calm and my behavior docile, because I had learned that sometimes the best decisions are made in silence, planned in secret, and executed when no one sees them coming. By the 3rd day of living together, a clear pattern had been set. I was an inconvenient guest in my own home. Frank had taken control of the living room and the television, deciding what was watched and at what volume, regardless of the fact that I had been watching my soaps at the same time for 30 years. Hope had completely reorganized my kitchen, putting my dishes in places I couldn't find them, and setting rules about what foods could and couldn't be bought. Linda visited daily to ensure everything was harmonious. But her idea of harmony was just making sure I adapted completely to everyone else's needs. The straw that broke the camel's back came when Hope informed me they had decided to change the gas provider because the one I used was too expensive, and that they were also going to change the phone company because they needed a more complete family plan. When I asked if they had considered that I was the one paying those bills with my retirement money, she looked at me like I had said something completely absurd. "Oh, Hope, now that we all live together, it's only logical that we share the expenses. Don't you think that's more fair?" Fair. That word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. It was fair that I should share the expenses of my house with people who had moved in uninvited. It was fair that I slept in the utility room while they occupied my master bedroom. It was fair that I change all my schedules and habits to accommodate theirs. It was fair that I lose control over my own home so that others could feel comfortable. Everything was fair except asking me what I wanted or needed. That same afternoon, while Linda and Michael were discussing the possibility of making more changes to the house to optimize the space, I snuck into my old bedroom. I knew the Harris family was out shopping. I wanted to retrieve some of my personal things, photographs and memories that had been buried under their belongings. What I found left me speechless. They had packed all of my things into cardboard boxes as if they were objects to be stored away when they were no longer needed. My family photographs, my diplomas from my sewing courses, the love letters from my late husband, the gifts Linda had given me over the years, everything was packed away carelessly in boxes, as if it were just clutter that needed to be cleared out. Instead, the dresser was full of Hope's clothes. The vanity was covered in her cosmetics and perfumes, and on the nightstand were photographs of the Harris family. My bedroom had been completely erased and replaced by the lives of other people. Linda walked in while I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes that contained 30 years of my personal life. Instead of understanding why I was crying, she got upset with me for digging through things that were already organized. "Mom, we already put all this away to make space. If you need something specific, just tell me and I'll get it for you." She was offering me limited supervised access to my own memories, like I was a child who needed permission to touch her own toys. "Linda," I said with a calmness that surprised even me, "do you even realize what is happening here?" She sighed with that look of forced patience she had perfected over the last few days. "Mom, what's happening is that we are being a united family supporting each other. Michael's parents needed a place to stay, and we have the space. It's that simple. Simple for everyone except for the person whose life had been completely rearranged without her consent." That night, after eating dinner in silence while the Harris family argued over what TV show to watch, I went to the utility room early, but instead of going to bed, I stayed awake. I was planning something I never imagined I'd be capable of. It was a quiet plan, a discreet one that nobody would see coming because they had all assumed I was too docile, too grateful, too dependent to make any drastic decisions. All my life I had been the woman who adapted, the one who gave in, the one who found ways to make things work without creating conflict. I had raised Linda alone after her father abandoned us working double shifts to give her everything she needed. I had cared for my sick mother for 10 years until she passed. I had been the sister who was always available, the friend who never failed the neighbor everyone could count on. But at 68 years old, living like a stranger in my own home, I realized that all that kindness had just made me someone whose needs didn't matter to anyone. On the 4th day, Linda arrived with news that confirmed everything I had been fearing. "Mom, we were talking, and we think it would be good to make some more permanent changes to the house." Michael spoke with an architect friend of his, and he says, "We can expand the little room where you're sleeping. We can add your own little bathroom and a small kitchenette. That way you'll have more independence and we'll all be more comfortable." Independence. They were offering me independence in a maid's quarters built on the property of my own house. The proposal was clear. They would keep the main house, my living room, my kitchen, my bedroom, my dining room, and I would become the tenant of an addition built specifically to keep me out of their way. Linda presented this idea as if it were a gift, a generous solution that would solve all the co-living problems. What she was really offering was my own physical and emotional exile disguised as consideration for my needs. "And who is going to pay for this renovation?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Well, Mom, we thought that since it's for your benefit, and you'll be the one enjoying it the most, it would only be fair if you contributed the main part of the cost. Michael already got some estimates, and it's not that much money. Not that much money. To turn the owner of the house into an expensive tenant on her own land. Not that much money. To complete my expulsion from the spaces I had worked my whole life to maintain. In that moment, I knew I had reached my limit. I was not going to be complicit in my own disappearance. I was not going to finance the construction of my own exile. I was not going to smile and say thank you while they turned me into a burden that had to be hidden in a corner of the yard. The time had come to make a decision that would change everything, but no one would see it coming until it was far too late to stop it. What they didn't know was that a 68-year-old woman who had survived a difficult marriage, raised a daughter alone, and worked 40 years to buy and maintain her house, had resources they had never even considered, and I was about to use every single one of them. For the next 2 weeks, I became a silent observer of the complete transformation of my home. Frank Harris had established a rigorous schedule for everything: breakfast at 7 sharp, news at 8, lunch at 2, dinner at 7 at night. It wasn't a suggestion or a proposal for living together. It was a set of regulations that he had imposed and that everyone else, including me, had to follow. When I tried to explain that I had my own schedules after 68 years of life, he looked at me as if I were being capricious. Hope, in a house where many people live, there has to be order. We can't all just be doing our own thing. Doing our own thing in my own house. The irony of that phrase caused me a deep sadness every time I heard it. Frank spoke as if he had arrived to bring order to a place that was disorganized, when the reality was he had arrived to impose his order on a house that had been functioning perfectly fine with my rules for 3 decades. Hope had reorganized my kitchen so much that I couldn't even find my own plates. When I asked her where she had put my favorite set of teacups, she answered with a condescending smile. "Oh, Hope, those cups are very old. I brought some much nicer, more modern ones." My old cups. They were the cups my late husband had given me for our 10th anniversary. The only material things I had left of him besides my wedding ring. But to Hope, they were just old objects that needed to be replaced with something more modern. When I insisted that I wanted to use my cups, she sighed dramatically and muttered something about people who cling to the past. In the past she wanted me to forget was my own history, my own memories, my own identity within my home. Linda came by every afternoon to supervise that the co-living was harmonious, but her idea of harmony consisted exclusively of checking that I wasn't causing any problems for the Harris family. "How did your mom behave today?" she would ask Hope directly, as if I were a child on probation. "She didn't give you any trouble, did she? She didn't complain about anything." Each question was a small humiliation that stabbed me in the heart. It confirmed that my own daughter saw me as a burden to be managed, not as the owner of the house who deserved respect in her own home. One afternoon, while I was washing dishes in a kitchen I no longer recognized as mine, I heard Linda talking to Michael in the living room. "My mom has been quieter lately. I think she's finally starting to understand that this situation is better for everyone." Better for everyone. Except for me. My silence, which they interpreted as acceptance, was actually the result of a sadness so profound it had taken away my will to fight. I wasn't accepting the situation. I was surrendering to it, and there was a huge difference between those two things. During those 2 weeks, I developed a habit of getting up very early before the Harris family woke up just to have at least 1 hour of solitude in my own house. I would sit in the kitchen with my coffee, looking out the window at the yard, where I had planted roses for so many years, trying to remember what it felt like to be the owner of my own space. But even those moments of peace were interrupted when Frank would come down and look at me as if I were invading his kitchen. "Good morning, Hope. Did you make coffee for everyone yet?" "Did you make coffee for everyone yet?" As if it were my obligation to be the live-in maid. As if my waking up early was an opportunity for me to serve them. Not a desperate attempt to find a few minutes of peace in my own home. When I explained that I had only made coffee for myself as I had done for 30 years, He would sigh with that expression of patience that adults reserve for badly behaved children. "Well, since you're already here, you could make a little more. It's the same amount of work after all." It was not the same amount of work. Making coffee for one person who is going to drink it slowly, thinking her own thoughts, planning her day, is not the same as making coffee as part of a mandatory domestic service for people who consider that service their right. But Frank didn't understand that difference, or he didn't care to. To him, I was just a woman living in the same house, and therefore I had to contribute with domestic labor. It didn't matter that the house was mine, or that my contributions were much greater than washing dishes and making coffee. One morning while I was preparing breakfast for 4 people, when I used to only prepare it for myself, I vividly remembered the time when Linda was little and I worked double shifts at the textile factory. I would get up at 4 in the morning to pack her lunch. I would take her to my neighbor Rose's house, who watched her while I worked. I would run to the factory to work my 7 to 3 shift. Then I would run to pick up Linda, stop by the market to buy groceries for dinner, get home to cook and clean, help her with her homework. And I would go to bed around midnight, only to repeat the routine the next day. For 10 years I lived like that, sacrificing my dreams, my rest, my chances of finding love again, all so Linda could have what she needed. I never complained. I never made her feel like a burden. I never held her responsible for my sacrifices. I worked weekends. I took extra jobs. I sold the few pieces of jewelry I had. All to pay for a private school, nice clothes, school supplies, outings with her friends. I wanted her to have the opportunities I never had, to study to be able to choose her future without the financial limitations I had faced. When Linda married Michael, I felt a mix of pride and melancholy. Pride because I had succeeded in raising a successful daughter who had finished college, found a hardworking husband, and could have a comfortable life. Melancholy because I knew my job as a mother was over, and now I would have to learn to live for myself after 2 decades of living exclusively for her. But I never imagined that my daughter would interpret my availability and generosity as signs that I had no life of my own, no needs of my own, and no right to make my own decisions. I remembered the day I paid off the mortgage on this house. Linda was already married, living in her own apartment with her job and her independent life. I was 53 years old, and for the first time in decades, I found myself living alone, responsible only for myself, able to make decisions without consulting anyone. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Terrifying because I didn't know who I was when I wasn't being a mother or an employee or a caregiver. Liberating because I could wake up without someone else's schedule, eat whatever I felt like, watch TV in my favorite language, and decorate my house according to my own tastes. For 15 years, I had enjoyed that freedom. I had learned to cook dishes I had always wanted to try. I had made friends with the neighbors. I had taken knitting classes at the community center. I had taken bus trips to visit my sisters in other states. It wasn't an exciting life by younger people's standards, but it was my life, built according to my own desires and needs. Every piece of furniture in the house I had chosen. Every color on the walls reflected my personality. Every corner held memories of moments I had enjoyed in solitude or with guests I chose to receive. Now, serving breakfast to people who had completely reorganized my living space, I realized I had gone back to being what I was during the first half of my life. Someone whose existence revolved around the needs of others. Someone whose personal preferences were considered secondary. Someone who should be grateful just to have a place to sleep and eat, even if that place was her own house. The difference was, when Linda was little, I chose to make those sacrifices out of motherly love. Now they were being imposed on me without my consent. Frank finished his breakfast and got up from the table without taking his plate or saying thank you. It was a habit he had established from day one. He ate, I cleaned up, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When Hope finished, she did the same and added, "Hope some of my friends are coming over for coffee this afternoon. Could you make some scones? They're used to me serving them homemade things." It wasn't a request. It was an order disguised as a favor. She didn't ask if I had time or the desire or the ingredients to make scones. She simply assumed I would be available to cook for her guests. "Hope," I said in the calmest voice I could find. I also had plans for this afternoon. I wanted to go to the market and visit my friend Rose. She looked at me as if I had said something completely absurd. Oh, but you can do those things any day. My friends only visit every once in a while. My plans, which included maintaining social relationships I had cultivated for decades, were things I could do any day. Her plans were priorities, urgent. My social life was disposable. Hers was important. That afternoon, while I was making scones for Hope's friends, I thought about my dear friend Rose. She had been my confidant and my support during the most difficult times of my life. Rose was the one who helped me when Linda was sick, and I had no money for the doctor. Rose was the one who lent me money for school supplies when I was between jobs. Rose was the one who stayed with me at the hospital when I had my gallbladder removed and Linda couldn't miss work. Rose was the person who knew me best in the world, and now I couldn't visit her because I had to make scones for the friends of a woman who had come to live in my house uninvited. Hope's friends arrived at 4 in the afternoon, and I became the invisible servant at a social gathering in my own living room. I served coffee. I brought more scones. I collected plates while they talked as if I wasn't even there. When one of them complimented the scones, Hope smiled and said, "Oh yes, Hope is very good in the kitchen. She has a real knack for desserts." As if I were her talented housekeeper, not the owner of the house who had been forced to cook for her guests. During the whole gathering, I listened to Hope describe her new house to her friends. She talked about the changes they had made, how they had improved the layout of the spaces, the plans they had for future renovations. Her friends congratulated her on finding such a comfortable place and for being so lucky to live in such a beautiful house. At no point did she mention that the house had an owner, that those changes had been made without consulting that owner, or that the future plans would affect another person's life. In her version of reality, she and Frank were the protagonists of a successful housing story, and I was just a secondary character barely worth mentioning. When the friends left, Hope thanked me for helping her with the meeting. Helping her, as if making scones and serving coffee in my own home was a favor I was doing for her, not an imposition she had forced on me. Everything was delicious, Hope. My friends were delighted. They complimented you a lot on the scones. She was giving me feedback on my performance as a servant, not acknowledging that I had sacrificed my own plans to satisfy hers. That night, after washing all the dishes from the party and cleaning the living room where her guests had been, I sat in the utility room that was now my bedroom. I pulled out a box of photographs that I had managed to rescue before the Harris family completely reorganized my old room. They were photos from different eras of my life: my wedding, Linda as a baby, family birthdays, outings with friends, Christmas celebrations. In every single one of those photos, I was in my own home, surrounded by people who respected and valued me. There was one photograph that especially caught my eye. It was from my 60th birthday 8 years ago. Linda had organized a small surprise party. My friend Rose had come, my neighbors, some of my old co-workers from the factory who were also retired. In the photo, I was sitting in my favorite armchair, surrounded by people who loved me in my living room, decorated according to my tastes, smiling genuinely because I felt loved and respected in my own space. That woman in the photograph seemed like a different person compared to who I was now. What had changed in those 8 years? When had I gone from being the respected host of my own home to the tolerated resident who had to be grateful for a place to live? At what moment had Linda decided that my needs were less important than other people's? When had she started treating me like a problem that needed to be solved, instead of like her mother, who deserved consideration and respect? I remembered a conversation I'd had with Linda about a year ago when she first started suggesting it would be good for me to have more company. At the time, I had interpreted her comments as genuine concern for my well-being. I thought she was worried I was lonely, that maybe she felt guilty for not visiting more often. I never imagined that those comments were the prelude to a plan to reorganize my life according to someone else's convenience. "Mom, you're not getting any younger," Linda had said during that conversation. "Aren't you afraid of living alone? What if you get sick and no one is here to help you?" At the time, those questions seemed like legitimate expressions of a daughter's love. Now I realized they were preparatory arguments to justify decisions she had already made without consulting me. Linda had decided that I was a vulnerable person who needed supervision, and she had used that narrative to convince herself that imposing unwanted company in my house was an act of kindness, not an invasion. The reality was, I didn't feel vulnerable living alone. I felt independent, capable, and in charge of my own time and space. I had an exercise routine that included walking every morning. I had a doctor I visited regularly for my checkups. I had neighbors who looked out for each other. I had my friend Rose who visited me weekly. I was not isolated or unprotected. I was living exactly how I wanted to live. But Linda had decided that wasn't good enough according to her standards of what constituted an appropriate life for a woman my age. The next day, I woke up hoping to have an honest conversation with Linda about how I was feeling with all these changes. When she arrived in the afternoon, she brought a man with her. She introduced him as Robert the architect who is going to design your new little house. My new little house. They had moved forward with the plans to build my maid's quarters without even asking me if I agreed with the project. The architect, a young man named Robert, began measuring the yard and making drawings of what would be my new dwelling on my own property. "It's going to be very nice, Ms. Hope," Robert told me as he drew up blueprints to confine me to a corner of my own land. "It will have its own full bathroom, a kitchenette, a small living area, and a very comfortable bedroom. It will be like having your own independent little apartment." My own independent little apartment, built in the yard of the house that was already mine, paid for with my own money, to solve the problem of my presence in the main living spaces that were also mine. Linda was thrilled with the project. "Isn't it going to be beautiful, Mom? You'll have your privacy and we'll have ours. It's going to be perfect for everyone." Forced privacy isn't privacy. It's isolation. Mandatory independence isn't independence, it's expulsion. But Linda had found a way to make my banishment sound like a gift, and she was genuinely convinced she was doing me a favor. "And how much is this construction going to cost?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be my financial responsibility. Robert consulted his notes and mentioned a figure that represented almost all of my remaining savings after the remodel. Linda quickly intervened. "Don't worry about the money, Mom. We see it as an investment in your comfort. Besides, think about it. It will be yours forever. Yours forever. Within a marked-off space of my own property, paid for with my own money, built to solve the problem I represented to others." That night, lying in the utility room listening to Frank snoring in what used to be my bedroom, I made a final decision. I was not going to let them build me a maid's quarters in my own yard. I was not going to finance my own marginalization. I was not going to continue being complicit in a situation that had made me a stranger in my own home. The time had come to take measures that no one would expect from a 68-year-old woman who had been compliant and accommodating her entire life. But first, I needed help from someone who truly knew me. Someone who understood who I was before I became the diminished version everyone saw now. I needed to talk to my friend Rose. She was the only person who remembered the Hope who had raised a daughter alone, who had worked 40 years to buy her house, who had survived a difficult marriage and gotten ahead through sheer force of will. Rose would help me remember that I was much stronger than I appeared and far more capable of making drastic decisions than anyone could imagine. The next morning, while the Harris family was eating breakfast and discussing their plans for the day as if they owned the place, I got dressed in my nicest clothes, grabbed my purse, and announced that I was going out. "Where are you going?" Hope asked me with that supervisory tone she had adopted. "I'm going to visit my friend Rose," I replied with a calm that surprised me. "I have some important things to discuss with her." Frank looked up from his newspaper and eyed me with suspicion. "What kind of important things?" As if he had the right to monitor my social activities, as if I were responsible for reporting my movements. "Things women our age talk about," I replied without giving him any more details. "Rose and I have been friends for 30 years. We always have plenty to talk about. and I walked out of my house without asking for any more permission or giving any more explanations, because for the first time in weeks, I remembered that I did not have to answer to people who were living on my property out of my generosity. The walk to Rose's house helped me clear my thoughts. For weeks I had felt confused, sad, displaced, but I hadn't been able to pinpoint exactly what was wrong with the situation. Now, walking through the streets of my neighborhood toward my dearest friend's house, I understood. The problem wasn't the co-living itself. The problem was that they had made decisions about my life without consulting me. They had reorganized my home without considering my feelings, and they had assumed that I had no right to an opinion about changes that directly affected my daily well-being. But what nobody knew was that the Hope walking to Rose's house was no longer the same one who had passively accepted the invasion of her home. This was a woman who had remembered her own strength, who had decided to take back control of her life, and who was about to prove that underestimating a 68-year-old woman could be a very costly mistake. Rose welcomed me into her home with that warm smile that had been my refuge for so many difficult years. But when she saw my face, her expression changed immediately. "What's wrong, my friend? You look different. Are you sick?" I wasn't sick in my body, but something inside me had broken in a way I didn't know how to explain. I sat in her kitchen, the same place where we had shared coffee and problems for 3 decades. And for the first time in weeks, I felt I could speak freely without someone judging me or cutting me off. "Rose, I think I'm losing my house without even realizing it," I said. The words came out of my mouth as if I had been holding them in for years. "They're not taking it from me legally, but they're taking it piece by piece, decision by decision, until I don't even recognize myself in my own home." Rose poured me a coffee in one of her porcelain cups, the ones she only used for special occasions. She sat across from me with that complete attention that only a true friend can give. For 2 hours, I told her everything that had happened since the day Linda arrived with the news that the Harris family was moving in. I described every small humiliation, every decision made, without consulting me every moment they had treated me like a maid in my own house. Rose listened without interrupting, but I saw her face transform from surprise to indignation, and finally to a determination I knew very well. It was the same expression she had when she helped me confront the doctors who didn't want to treat Linda when she was sick because I didn't have health insurance. "Hope," Rose said when I finished my story, "do you realize what is happening here?" Her question was exactly the same one I had asked Linda, but the tone was completely different. Rose spoke to me as an equal, as an intelligent woman who deserved respect, not as a confused old woman who needed reality explained to her. "What's happening is that your own daughter is pushing you out of your house in the gentlest way possible, but she is pushing you out." Those words hit me like cold water, but at the same time I felt relieved. Someone else saw what I had been feeling, but hadn't been able to name. I wasn't exaggerating, I wasn't being dramatic, I wasn't misinterpreting things. My instinct was correct. I was being expelled from my own home, but in a way so gradual and disguised as kindness that it was hard to protest without seeming ungrateful. "But Rose," I said, "they say it's temporary, that they'll only be there a few months while they get organized." Rose looked at me with that expression she used when she wanted me to face a hard truth. "My friend, have you seen them do anything to look for another place to live? Have they mentioned specific dates for leaving? Have they talked about apartments they're looking at or jobs they're seeking elsewhere?" She was right. In 3 weeks of living together, I had never once heard the Harris family talk about plans to move out. On the contrary, they talked about permanent changes, long-term improvements, and renovation projects. "And this little house they want to build for you," Rose continued, "that is not temporary hope. That is a reorganization of your property, so they get the main house and you live in an attachment. They are turning you into the grandma who lives in the back of the lot and making you pay for your own marginalization with your own money." Her analysis was so clear and so brutal that it left me speechless. She had put into words exactly what I had been feeling but couldn't articulate. Rose got up from the table and started pacing her kitchen like she always did when she was thinking of practical solutions. "How much money do you have saved?" she asked me directly. "Do you have the documents that prove you are the owner of the house? Does Linda have any legal rights to the property?" These were questions I hadn't considered because I had always trusted that my daughter would respect my rights without needing legal documents. But Rose was right to ask. If the situation got difficult, I needed to know exactly what my resources and my rights were. "The house is completely in my name," I answered. "I paid it off 15 years ago, and I have all the deeds. Linda has no legal claim on the property." Rose smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "That's good, my friend. That means that legally you have all the power in this situation. The problem is you've been acting as if you have none." She was right. I had been behaving like a tolerated guest instead of the owner with absolute rights to her property. "And what money do you have available?" Rose asked. When I told her the amount I had left after the remodel, she grew thoughtful for a moment. "Is it enough for you to live comfortably for a good while, if you make the right decisions? But first, you have to decide what you really want to do." That question took me by surprise. For weeks, I had just been reacting to other people's decisions. I hadn't actively thought about what I wanted to happen. "I want my house back," I said without hesitating. "I want to be able to sit in my living room whenever I feel like it, watch TV on my schedule, use my own teacups, have my friends over whenever I want. I want to be the owner of my own space again." Rose nodded as if she had been waiting for exactly that answer. "Then that is what we are going to get. But it won't be easy, and you're going to have to be willing to make decisions that will upset a lot of people." For the next hour, Rose and I developed a plan. It was bolder than anything I had ever imagined I'd be capable of executing. It wasn't a plan for direct confrontation because that would only result in arguments and drama that I wanted to avoid. It was a quiet, systematic plan. It would use my legal rights strategically to regain control of my situation without giving anyone the chance to manipulate me emotionally. "The first thing you have to do," Rose explained, "is go to the bank and talk to your account manager. You need to understand exactly what your financial options are and how you can protect your money." She suggested I investigate the possibility of renting out my house while I lived somewhere else, generating income to supplement my retirement. If you can get good rent for your house, you can rent a small apartment for yourself and have extra money to live comfortably. The idea excited me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I could have my own space again, without imposed schedules, without having to ask permission to use my own kitchen, without having to listen to conversations about how to reorganize my house according to their preferences. Rose also suggested I consult with a lawyer to fully understand my rights as a property owner and what legal options I had if someone refused to leave my property. "But most importantly," Rose said, taking my hands, "you have to do all of this without telling Linda anything until the decisions are already made. If you tell her your plans before you execute them, she will try to convince you not to. She'll use emotional guilt. She'll say you're being selfish or that you're hurting the family. You have to be ready with a done deal before you have that conversation." Rose was right. Linda had proven that she didn't respect my ability to make decisions about my own life, so there was no point in consulting her about decisions that only affected me. My whole life I had been in the habit of seeking approval before making big changes. But at 68 years old, the time had come to act on my own judgment without asking anyone for permission. That afternoon, Rose accompanied me to the bank where I'd had my account for 20 years. Mr. Jim, the manager, who always helped me, received me with his usual kindness. But I noticed his surprise when I explained that I wanted to explore the possibility of renting out my house and looking for housing options for myself. "Ms. Hope, are you sure you want to make this change? At your age, we generally recommend stability instead of moving." "At my age?" That phrase everyone used to limit me to suggest I was no longer capable of making important decisions about my own life. But instead of feeling diminished as had happened so many times before, this time I felt determined. "Mr. Jim, at my age, I'm very clear about what I want and what I don't want. And what I don't want is to continue living in a situation that doesn't make me happy." Rose squeezed my hand discreetly, giving me silent support to maintain my resolve. Mr. Jim explained that with the current value of my house in that area, I could get a very good rental price. It would give me significant income in addition to my retirement. He also helped me calculate how much it would cost to rent a small apartment in a safe, comfortable area for people my age. The numbers were very encouraging. I would have more disposable income each month than I'd had in years, and complete freedom to organize my life according to my own preferences. "And what if I want to move back into my house in the future?" I asked him. "Rental contracts can be made for specific periods," he explained. "You can rent for 1 year, 2 years, or whatever time you feel is appropriate. Your house is still yours. You're just generating income from it while you live elsewhere." That flexibility reassured me a lot. I wasn't selling my house or giving it up permanently. I was taking control of the situation in a way that benefited me financially. The next day, Rose and I went to see apartments in an area she had researched. They were small units but very well designed in a building where mostly retired people lived. They had common areas for socializing, an indoor garden, 24-hour security, and most importantly, each tenant had complete privacy and autonomy in their own space. The apartment I liked best had a small but cozy living room, a bedroom with a large closet, a full kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the trees on the street. "Can you imagine, my friend," Rose said as we looked out from the balcony, "you could have your coffee out here in the mornings without anyone telling you what time to eat breakfast. You could invite anyone you want over without asking for permission. You could decorate according to your tastes without anyone moving your things." For the first time in weeks, I felt excited about the future instead of nostalgic for the past. The building manager, a very kind woman named Patricia, explained that most of the residents were retired people who had made decisions similar to the one I was considering. "A lot of people come here after complicated family situations," she told us discreetly. "Here they find the peace they needed without losing their independence." I didn't feel judged or strange for considering a move. On the contrary, I felt like part of a group of people who had prioritized their own personal well-being. That night, I returned to my house with a completely different perspective. Instead of feeling like a victim of circumstances, I felt like a woman who was about to take control of her life in an intelligent and strategic way. Frank and Hope were watching television in my living room, sitting on my sofas, commenting on the shows as if they owned the place. But instead of feeling sadness or resentment, I felt a strange calm. Soon, that scene would be someone else's problem, not mine. Linda arrived a little later with more news about the construction of my independent little house. Robert had finished the blueprints and was ready to start the work. "Mom, have you decided what color you want to paint your new house?" she asked with genuine enthusiasm. "It's so exciting, right? You're going to have your own brand new space." Her excitement was real, but it was based on a vision of my future that no longer matched my plans. "Linda," I said calmly, "I need to think a little more about that project. It's a very big decision, and I want to be completely sure before spending that much money." She looked at me surprised, because I had never questioned her suggestions for improving my life before. "But Mom, we already talked to Robert. It's all planned. I don't understand what else you have to think about." And that right there was the problem. She assumed that talking to Robert was the same as talking to me about the project. Over the next few days, I began to execute my plan systematically and silently. I went to the bank and organized my finances for the change. I spoke with a lawyer Rose recommended to understand my rights as a property owner. I visited 3 real estate agencies to get professional appraisals on the rental price of my house. I signed the lease for the apartment I had seen with Rose, using part of my savings as the deposit. I did every step during the hours when the Harris family was out running their errands and Linda was at her job. I would get up early, get ready as if I were going for normal shopping, and instead of going to the market, I would go to arrange the details of my new life. It was strange and exciting at the same time. For weeks I had felt like a passive spectator to changes others were making in my life. Now I was the active protagonist of changes I was creating. The hardest part was deciding what things to take with me and what to leave in the house for the future tenants. Rose helped me make a practical list: my family photographs, my clothes, some favorite kitchen utensils, my books, and the small pieces of furniture that had sentimental value. The large furniture and appliances would stay in the house, as they would make the property more attractive to rent and because I wouldn't have space for everything in my new apartment. 2 weeks after my first conversation with Rose, I had everything ready. I had signed a 2-year rental contract for my house with a young family who had responded to one of the ads. They had come to see it when the Harris family wasn't home, and they were charmed by how well cared for it was and by the location. The rent they were going to pay me was more than double what I needed for my new apartment, so I would have significant extra income. I had also hired a small moving company to transfer my personal belongings on the same day I left. Everything was coordinated, so the transition would be fast and efficient, without giving anyone time to convince me to change my mind or to create emotional drama that might make me doubt my decision. The night before the day I had chosen to move, I ate dinner in silence. Frank and Hope were arguing about what TV show to watch as if I wasn't even there. Linda had come by with more information about Robert and the construction of my little house, insisting that I needed to make a final decision on the project. Mom, Robert needs to start the work next week. We've already wasted a lot of time thinking about it. Linda, I said, with a tranquility that surprised me. Tomorrow we are going to talk about all these plans. I will have a definitive answer for you. She smiled satisfied, probably believing that I was finally going to accept her project. The Harris family also seemed happy, surely thinking that soon they would have the main house all to themselves. If they had known what was planned for the next day, they probably wouldn't have slept so peacefully. That morning, I got up at 5, as I had done my entire adult life. But this time, it was the last time I would wake up in the utility room of my own house. I showered, got dressed in my best clothes, made coffee just for myself, and sat down to write 3 letters. One for Linda, one for the Harris family, and one to leave information about the house for the new tenants who would be arriving in the afternoon. The letter to Linda was the hardest to write, but also the most necessary. I explained that I had decided to rent the house and move to an apartment where I could live by my own rules. I made it clear that this was not an impulsive decision, but the result of weeks of careful planning. I told her that I loved her, but that I could no longer continue living in a situation where my opinions didn't matter and my needs were not considered. At 8 in the morning, when the Harris family came down for breakfast, expecting to find the coffee made and the table set as had been my routine for weeks, they found the 3 letters on the dining room table, and a completely silent house, because at that hour I was already in my new apartment drinking coffee on my balcony, watching the city wake up, and feeling for the first time in months that I had taken back control of my own life. The transformation had been silent, but it had been complete. And the best part was that no one had been able to stop me, because no one had realized what was happening until it was already too late. At 10 in the morning, while I was organizing my things in my new apartment with a peace I hadn't felt in months, Rose called me. My friend Linda just called me crying, completely desperate. They found the letters, and she cannot believe what you did. Rose couldn't hide a certain satisfaction in her voice, and I couldn't help but smile either. Linda had arrived at my house at 9 to talk about the construction. She had found Frank and Hope with the letters in their hands, completely bewildered. My letter to the Harris family had been direct. They had 30 days to find another place to live, as was my legal right as the owner. The letter to Linda explained how I had felt living like a stranger in my own home, being treated like a maid instead of the owner. At 2 in the afternoon, Linda showed up at my apartment. When I opened the door, I saw my daughter, disheveled, her eyes red from crying, completely disoriented. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing?" Her first words weren't of concern for my well-being, but of confusion about my actions. "This is my new home," I replied calmly, "and what I'm doing is living according to my own decisions for the first time in months." Linda looked around as if trying to understand how I had organized all this without her finding out. "But Mom, when did you plan this? Why didn't you tell me anything?" "Linda, I told you many things for 3 weeks. I told you I felt uncomfortable. I told you I missed my privacy. I told you I wanted to be consulted before decisions were made about my house. You heard my words, but you weren't listening to what I was telling you." "But Mom, we were just trying to help you. Michael's parents needed a place, and you have a big house. We were just trying to make it work for everyone." There was that word again. Everyone. In Linda's version, everyone included the Harris family, Michael, and herself, but it didn't include me. Linda, at what point did you consider what I wanted? When did you ask me if I was willing to change my entire routine to accommodate other people? Linda fell silent, processing my questions. It was the first time anyone had made her think of me as an independent person with rights. "So what's going to happen to Michael's parents?" she asked, revealing the real reason for her visit. "Linda, that's a question you should have asked yourself before you invited them without consulting me. Michael's parents are Michael's responsibility, not mine." "But Mom, they already sold their apartment." And there it was, the core of the problem. Linda had made irreversible decisions based on the assumption that I would be available to solve the consequences. Linda listened to me closely. I never said they could sell their apartment and live in my house indefinitely. The problem you have now is the result of decisions you made without consulting the person most affected by them. Linda started to cry, and I felt the maternal urge to comfort her. But I stopped myself. Comforting her now would just recreate the very pattern that got me into this situation. "But Mom, you're my mother. Family is supposed to help each other." "Linda, family help doesn't mean one person has to sacrifice their entire well-being so everyone else can be comfortable. For 3 weeks I was the only one sacrificing anything. What did any of you sacrifice?" She had no answer because the answer was obvious. None of them had sacrificed a thing. Linda stayed until 5 in the afternoon, and we had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Gradually, she began to understand that she had confused my availability with an obligation and my generosity with weakness. A week later, Linda visited me with a completely different attitude. "Michael got a loan to buy a house where he can live with his parents," she said with a smile that mixed relief and embarrassment. "It turns out they did have options. It was just easier to use your house than to find their own solutions." Exactly. They had resources all along. It was just more convenient to use my home than to make the effort to solve their own situation independently. Linda established a routine of visiting me every Sunday. Gradually, we developed a more balanced relationship. Linda started asking my opinion on things instead of informing me of decisions already made. 3 months later, I received an unexpected call from Hope Harris. "Hope, Frank and I just want to thank you and to apologize. We weren't very considerate." Her apology was sincere. "Now that we have our own house again, we realize how important it is to have your own space." 6 months later, Linda arrived for her weekly visit, holding a decoration magazine. "What do you think of this color, Mom?" It was the first time in years she had asked my opinion before deciding instead of informing me of something already done. "I like it, but the important thing is that you like it. It's your house." Linda smiled. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. Every person deserves to be the main character in their own life, even within a family." That afternoon, watching the sunset from my balcony, I thought about the journey I had taken. I had learned that setting boundaries is not selfishness, it's self-respect. That saying no is a right, not a betrayal. That true love includes respect for autonomy, not control over decisions. The most important lesson: true family harmony isn't built on the silent sacrifice of one person. It's built on mutual respect. And sometimes to teach that lesson, you have to be willing to surprise the people who have underestimated you. A year after my silent transformation, I had established a routine that brought a deep peace to my heart. Every morning, I woke up when my body told me to without schedules imposed by others. I watered my plants on the balcony as the sun gently entered my apartment. I made my coffee exactly how I liked it, and I sat down to read a few pages of the Bible. For the first time in decades, my agenda depended solely on my own desires. And I had discovered that I had much more energy when I wasn't dealing with the impositions of others. I spent my afternoons in the building's community garden talking with my new friends about our life experiences, knitting blankets for the local nursing home, or simply watching the street from a bench under the trees. I had met Mercedes, a 75-year-old woman who had also made the decision to live alone after similar family problems. It's funny. Mercedes told me as we knitted together how people think that at our age we no longer have the right to choose how we want to live. On Sunday afternoons, Linda continued to visit me religiously. Our relationship had transformed completely. She no longer arrived with lists of things I needed to do or changes we should consider. She came simply to spend time with me, to have coffee on my balcony, to tell me about her life, and genuinely ask about mine. It was the mother-daughter relationship I had always dreamed of having, based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not on obligations and assumptions. Mom. Linda told me during one of those Sunday afternoons, "My friends always ask me if I don't feel bad that you live alone, and I tell them, you don't live alone. You live in freedom. It's different." Her words moved me deeply because they meant she finally understood the difference between chosen solitude and imposed isolation. I hadn't fled from company. I had fled from control disguised as love. The income from renting my house had given me a financial security I hadn't had in years. I could afford small luxuries that I previously considered impossible: buying fresh flowers for my apartment every week, going to the movies with my friends from the building, taking painting classes at the cultural center. For the first time since my youth, I had money that was completely mine to spend, according to my own tastes, without having to justify every dollar to anyone. One autumn afternoon, while walking in the park near my building, I ran into Patricia, my old neighbor. "Hope it's so good to see you," she said with a genuine smile. "You look wonderful, so peaceful." She told me that the family renting my house was taking marvelous care of it, that the children played in the garden where I had planted my roses, that the wife had put in new plants that perfectly complemented my original design. "You know what's funny?" Patricia told me. "When Linda told me what you had done, I thought you had been very drastic. But now that I see how you're living, seeing you so happy and so in charge of yourself, I understand you made the best possible decision." Her words confirmed something I had been feeling but hadn't verbalized. I hadn't just solved my problem. I had inspired other people to reflect on their own lives. During the winter, I received an unexpected visit. It was Michael, my son-in-law. He arrived alone one Saturday afternoon. "Ms. Hope, I wanted to talk to you," he said with a humility I had never seen in him before. "I wanted to thank you for what you did." His gratitude surprised me. "When you left so decisively, you forced all of us to grow up. My parents learned to be independent again. Linda learned to respect other people's decisions. And I learned that solving family problems doesn't mean taking advantage of someone else's generosity." Michael told me his parents were very happy in their new house. They had made friends in their new neighborhood, and they felt useful and autonomous again. "At first they felt rejected," he explained, "but later they understood that you didn't reject them. You rejected a situation that you had not chosen." Exactly. I had rejected being treated as an available resource, not the people themselves. "Do you know what impresses me most about all this?" Michael asked before leaving. "You found a way to get your dignity back without permanently hurting anyone. We all learned something important, and we all ended up in better situations." He was right. My transformation hadn't been vindictive or destructive. It had been educational and liberating for everyone involved. In the spring, as I celebrated the first anniversary of my move, I reflected on everything that had changed in my life. I had regained not only my autonomy, but also my identity. For months, I had felt like a diminished version of myself, like an old woman who should just be grateful for any attention. Now I felt like the complete woman I had always been, intelligent, capable, and deserving of respect. Linda arrived that afternoon with a special gift, a photo album she had created with pictures of our family through the years. "I wanted you to have this," she said, "so you remember all the beautiful moments we've shared." As we looked through the album together, I realized something beautiful. The best family memories had happened when we all respected each other, when decisions were made together, when no one imposed their will on others. "Mom," Linda said, as we looked at a photo from my 65th birthday, "do you forgive me for not understanding what you needed sooner?" Her question moved me, but it also made me reflect. Linda, there is nothing to forgive because there was no malice in what you did. There was ignorance about my needs, yes, but there was also genuine love. The important thing is that we learn together. That night after Linda left, I sat on my favorite balcony with a cup of tea watching the city lights turn on one by one. I thought about the woman I had been a year earlier, confused, displaced, feeling like a burden in her own house. That woman had found the strength to completely transform her life, without hurting anyone but also without sacrificing her own dignity. I had learned that silence can be more powerful than words when combined with decisive action. I had discovered that setting boundaries doesn't destroy relationships, it improves them. I had proven that it is never too late to take back the leading role in your own story, no matter how many years you've spent living according to other people's expectations. The most valuable lesson had been understanding that respect is not begged for. It is demonstrated with actions. For decades, I had tried to earn respect by being compliant, adapting to the needs of others, and sacrificing my preferences. But true respect had finally arrived when I demonstrated that I had clear boundaries and the determination to enforce them. As the city prepared to sleep, I prepared for another night of peaceful sleep in my own space. No one else's schedules, no unwanted noises, no anxiety about what decisions someone else might make about my life the next day. It was a privilege I had reclaimed with intelligence and dignity, and one I valued more every single day. I closed my eyes and thanked God for giving me the wisdom to understand that some battles are won not by fighting, but by strategically walking away. I had chosen peace over conflict, autonomy over apparent comfort, and self-respect over the approval of others. Sometimes the greatest new beginning is the silence one chooses to keep. We're curious to know how far this story traveled. Where are you watching from? Comment below.